Okay, hello and welcome to another cover seminar on what is a quite rainy gray day here in Colchester, but is not where our speaker is. Thanks for coming along, Carla. Um, now, I have to admit that I don't not know your work in depth, Carla, but I saw the particular paper you were going to present on about degrowth pedagogy. Said, this is something which we should definitely engage with and learn more about. So that was my logic for inviting you. And with that very short introduction, I will hand it over to you then.
Thanks, Stephen. I appreciate it. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to present my paper. And I just will flag that it's the end of quite a long day here, where I've been up since something with a 4 in front of it. So if I'm not amazing tonight on answering any questions, please get in touch, and if I can answer those when I'm a little bit more fresh. But we'll see how we go, and I appreciate everyone that's come along tonight or this morning for you guys. I just wanted to start by acknowledging that I am living, working, playing on stolen land of the Turrbal and Yagara people as the First Nations owners of the lands on which I work and live and play. I pay my respects to the elders, laws, customs and creation spirits, and I recognise that these lands have always been places of teaching, learning and research. So I wanted to start by, I guess, engaging with the very provocative picture that you put together for my presentation tonight. And I assume it would have been aided by a bit of Gen AI. I hope I haven't made an incorrect assumption there. But what I kind of particularly enjoyed about it was that the face of the person, male or female, I'm not sure, in the picture was so awfully forlorn and just so sort of down about the fact that they were contained within this straitjacket, and yet everything around them is quite beautiful and flourishing and interesting. And I thought it was just so apt for how sometimes, uh, and I'm not sure if I've got any other business school scholars on the line tonight, but that's sometimes how I feel within a business school. Occasionally, I feel quite forlorn, and I know that there is so much going on outside that I want to be able to bring in, but that sometimes it just feels quite isolating to be that person in the straitjacket. And then I also thought it was great because it also spoke to the fact of how I think, many students feel as well, that they are conflicted. They see what's happening in the world around them, and they see the contradictions of capitalism and neoliberal capitalism and free markets, and they understand at some level that it's not working for us, but yet they're being taught and sort of brought into this world of thinking about business for growth and for profit and for profit maximization. So I think it was a great image, and I really appreciated it. So I suppose tonight I don't have an overly long presentation, I don't think, but so I can go through that, and then happy to have a discussion and to sort of talk about these concepts a little bit more. And oh, great. Everyone here is a business school scholar. Okay, so we can all relate then. Excellent. Okay, so business schools, why now? I guess it is obvious for those of us who are on the call. And I will say there are business schools that are doing great stuff, and I don't want to, make the case that business schools shouldn't exist or burn them down like Martin Parker says or anything like that. I guess what I can see is a humongous opportunity for business schools to do better by their students and their educators by broadening and expanding what they're teaching, not necessarily replacing, but certainly in alongside what is known as sort of traditional or orthodox business school curriculum. We should be seeing more and more alternative and particularly critical viewpoints being at least exposing the students to this. And so I guess the reason why we obviously need that is because at the moment we're tied to this concept of sustainable development, and how we frame everything from marketing, economics, finance is through the prism of sustainable development and the SDGs. And conceptually, this works really well to maintain business as usual, but obviously is not having the desired effect that we need. And so we need some level of pedagogical innovation of some description. And there's people doing work in fabulous work in different areas. And I think for me, as with a background in politics, government relations before I came into academia, and an interest in political economy, that's what my PhD was on. And so I saw immediately in working in a business school that this was an opportunity that could be certainly explored at greater depth. And so I'm just trying to make the slides run along a little bit quicker. Yeah, and so for me, a bit about my current research area, and the paper that Stephen mentioned is really my interest is in integrating degrowth into business schools for an expansive curriculum. And so in order to do that, I have developed a framework that is based on critical pedagogy, and that's what I'm probably spending most of tonight talking to you about. The other thing that I've been doing in collaboration with another scholar in the learning design space is trying to understand where change is possible, because we've done now a number of research studies with students themselves, and we've done that to try and understand the student perception and in some ways make a case, I suppose, for this pedagogy, because we recognize that within business schools themselves, being in the broader university system, but also in the very instrumentalist space where students come to a business school to learn skills that they can then apply almost immediately in the real world. And so we need to make the students the ones who are calling for this as much as educators as well. So that was the idea around trying to understand, is there openness? What is the current view of students around how they're taught about growth and what their underlying assumptions are. So for most of us on the call, we probably have some understanding of degrowth, but perhaps not. So I just thought if I quickly whip through degrowth in specifically as it relates to business and business education, because degrowth is a broad church and a broad, I suppose, it's anything from a social movement to a political critique to, there's a bunch of stuff going on in the degrowth world. And so specifically relating to business and organizations, we've got a couple of different touch points, I suppose, which is what I tend to gravitate towards when I'm talking about degrowth. And so it is very much the political critique and certainly of free market capitalism. But it is also the redesign of enterprise and the reordering of value and organizational value as well around planetary boundaries. It's the intentional downscaling of production and consumption, which is what sets it apart from green growth and obviously sustainable development. And it is definitely the idea of this reprioritization and very intentional prioritization around justice and fairness and equality. And the emphasis on commoning collective organization as well is important. And it does hold some synergy or opportunities in the entrepreneurship and leadership space, which is really important for business schools because they hang their hats on entrepreneurs and innovators. And so if degrowth is seen as a way in which we can be educating entrepreneurs to think in a different way, then it is also another quite attractive way in which degrowth can be positioned within a business school, potentially. And obviously, these things that it is not as regression and intentional economic recession and degrowing absolutely every sector, which is the thing that most people say when you talk about degrowth. They say, well, not, what about global south? What about, why would it be fair for everything to not grow? And so having this conversation about what is a valuable industry, a valuable sector, what is a detrimental, what is a destructive sector, and how do we talk about those within our sort of business school context. So the way in which pedagogically I think we integrate degrowth is through critical pedagogy, because and it's not really a natural space in a business school. So the literature around business schools is quite scathing on the fact that, they are very siloed, they are very instrumentalist, they predominantly teach neoclassical economics. So critical pedagogy in a business school is not necessarily a natural fit. However, critical pedagogy, and particularly the idea of the emancipatory, the ability of education to emancipate, is, I guess, a very necessary step that business schools need to take in order for them to become or step into the space that they need to in terms of responsible leadership. So it recognizes that we have to create a critical awareness around the issues before we can create any change as well. And it's very importantly recognizes that all meaning is constructed. So in the same way that, business schools like to pride themselves on being ideologically free zones, and they don't often want to integrate, politics into business, because as Stephen and I were joking about before the call, the market is a neutral place, and the market is somewhat free of, politics or irrationality. And so this idea that this is a construction is quite informative to then how we speak to students about the assumptions of economics, the assumptions of marketing, the assumptions of finance, et cetera, et cetera. So the framework itself, I guess, and I've got a slide coming up about this, but I guess it is not meant to be a sort of one size fits all, this everybody can go out and go through the steps of this framework. It's more creating conditions or putting forward some ideas around what the conditions that are required for business schools to be able to integrate something like degrowth. And it's doing so as a way of challenging the dominance of neoliberalism within business education. And so business educators could use something like this as a way, and they don't have to use it in its entirety, but there could be parts of it that they might integrate into their courses, or they might integrate it into their learning activities or assessment. And the sort of primary function is to critique the limitations of what we currently have. Because at the moment, we're not doing much critiquing of anything. We're just taking it as a skills-based learning that we must understand in order to be good business people. And so the critique part is not often there. And so firstly, we need to critique these limitations to the free market system. And if we apply a constructivist lens to understanding this, then we start to see that this isn't a fixed, we're not in a fixed system. It's not immutable. It's open to change. We can do something about it if it's not working for us. And so then that allows for some level of freedom and agency in students to be able to explore something different. And the different bit is degrowth, because you could substitute degrowth for other things, I'm sure. But for me, predominantly, the reason why I gravitate towards degrowth is because it draws from all of these different streams, like feminism, Marxism. It's bringing together a lot of different concepts and spaces, and then putting forward something as an alternative, which I think is quite important, because students need to feel a sense of hope and need to see something as an alternative. So what's being built in the sort of degrowth scholarship and the practices that are emerging, I think, is at least exemplifying what could be an alternative. And I did quite a bit of research and thinking about, well, how would we do this in the classroom? And the childlike mindset came up a lot as a way of integrating this sense of imagination, this sense of playfulness, this sense of you don't have to necessarily take this sort of degrowth concept at face value. You can play with it. You can think about how you might experiment with the concepts in your own discipline, in your own context, because degrowth is all about plurality. And, one of the big concepts within the scholarship is the pluriverse, the idea that it's not going to look the same for everyone everywhere. So how's it going to look for a finance student, in Australia, or going out into the workforce, or, working for a government agency, in the UK? It's going to look different. So how does it look for them? And so to put this into a sort of pictorial fashion, this schematic is really just bringing together this idea that they're pillars, they're kind of conditions for how to do this, how to bring this into your teaching. And those things all hinge on the critical thought as the first pillar. And then as we build out, we can start to conceptualize the system as being as being malleable, and we can change it rather than fixed. And then we start to look at, well, what else is out there, and how do we bring in other disciplines into the business school? Because the business school is notorious for not including climate scientists, or things that there's no multi-paradigmatic desire, really. So how do we expand that? And then degrowth, bringing the concepts of degrowth and the principles into the conversation, and wrapping that all in the idea of doing it through experimentation and playfulness, and this childlike mindset, that because children are very good at seeing, where things can fit together differently, or making an observation about why something isn't working. They're very good at that because they haven't been indoctrinated in the same way that we have. So trying to bring that into the classroom, I think is quite important. And so I think the key thing that I want to emphasize is that we're not replacing the current business education parameters, because I think we can't. Well, I'm coming at this more from a sort of Gramscian transition conflicts framing of, we were trying to exploit any of the green shoots within the system of a business school where we can, build this in, or at the very least. So for example, one university in New Zealand that was working with growth strategies asked me to come in and do and have a conversation about the alternative to a growth strategy. And so it was just exposing students to there being other ways. So a growth strategy is, yes, it is one strategy for an organization to take, particularly when they're, starting out or they're a startup. But there's also scaling strategies or amplification strategies or, collective, working collectively with other parts of the industry as a strategy. So it's just allowing students the opportunity to see these alternatives. And there is a level of academic activism in this as well, because we know that business scholars who may have been highly regarded in their own specific discipline of marketing for a very long time may not or may struggle with the concept of limiting consumption or heaven forbid, banning advertising, or these concepts are very challenging. And so in order for them to be integrated, there is going to be some level of academic activism that is the academic themselves having to sort of put themselves forward along these lines. But certainly, we're seeing more and more research emerging about very dissatisfied academics and students who, with the educational system, higher educational system, that we can see this desire for transformational education again. And so there's, that's happening. And I guess to sort of reinforce this idea that it's not an imposition, this framework isn't an imposition, it is more a guide. And it's in Freire's understanding of pedagogy that we come to this, that pedagogy shouldn't really, in his view, be a sort of technique to be learned and sort of hammered into every student, but it is a moral and political practice that equips students to be critical citizens and to engage critically with the system. And so what that, I suppose, looks like in terms of, the business school curriculum itself. So I'm just trying to close the chat here. Is across the different platforms, and I know we've got some others on the call that are not from a business school, so I'm sorry I keep banging on about business schools so much, but across the different areas of what we teach within business, but also you could argue more broadly across other disciplines as well, there are leverage points for degrowth in all of these. And so on the screen right now are some ways that degrowth can challenge or at least be put forward as an alternative way of thinking about economic growth dynamics, the consumption process, how we organize and share our ideas and share our technologies, and how we organize ourselves in terms of governance and organizational structures for businesses and enterprise, and how we use our resources within our enterprises as well. So there are leverage points along the way. And there's also many other opportunities, I think, that where we can certainly integrate these concepts. So to kind of complete the presentation tonight, I guess where to next for this is obviously integrating it more widely and scaling it, and certainly, moving beyond my small country of Australia, but also looking at it more as a transdisciplinary approach. So looking at how the pedagogical framework could apply in other disciplines beyond business. And certainly the work that we've done with students and student resistance and looking at students' willingness to engage with this is quite promising. though it also really does bring home the fact that we are fighting, or not fighting, I shouldn't use such inflammatory term, but we are up against a mindset that very much still equates prosperity and development with economic growth, and it's all around us and all encompassing. So it is certainly a very, not insurmountable, but challenging concept that is going to be very difficult to transcend. But I think the more and more pedagogy that emerges that resists this, or that at least promotes a paradigm that could be different, can be quite appealing to students. And so currently I'm looking at how we apply this in other disciplines, but also continuing to work on researching educators themselves and how they would feel about this and how they might see this happening in their classrooms as well. So that is really it for me. And now I'd love to have a conversation with you guys about how that, how that sits, what is interesting, what is resonant, what doesn't work in your world, everything.
Cool. Thank you for that. That's super interesting. I think we have a lot of things we could discuss. I will do the horrible thing of jump in and try to start a conversation. And you correctly caught or identified that I was using some Gen AI to make an image for your event. And part of it is because, and maybe this gets to a sort of more substantial issue, that in trying to think about how to visualize rather abstract things like degrowth or cooperative economic change or sort of like non-neoliberalism, I find it very hard to think visually or how to represent that,
Mm,
other than making like a graph or something, right? So that's part of it is sort of how you think about and represent the kinds of things we're talking about in a visually compelling manner is actually quite complicated. And I think that is actually part of a kind of pedagogic concern, is I think for many people, particularly young
mm,
people today who are raised in a more online, image-oriented, visually oriented social media environment, how you represent visually the things you're talking about is super important. And so I think part of the thing is what is or could be a sort of like visual language or symbolism for a sort of degrowth approach. Um,
mm. It's so funny you should say that, Stephen, because just this morning I was running a research workshop with educators, and we were doing an activity around a rich picture of degrowth in their educational context. And it's exactly as you say, there were no pictures. Everybody was using words, and it was really hard for them to, even people from the visual arts were using words. They couldn't draw what it was that we were talking about. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think that really speaks to this fact that we are quite imaginatively limited. And we maybe aren't at least being exposed to what this could look like. I think
hmm.
there are things that are out there, but we're, through the algorithm, through mainstream media, whatever the case may be, we're not seeing it.
I mean, the way that I've tried to think about that is usually when people hear degrowth, they think it means, oh, less stuff. I'll be poor. And I try to frame it as in terms of like you think about it in terms of value, what we have access to that is valuable that is not just more stuff. So there could be
Mm,
time with friends or family, a more sorry, a less depleted natural environment. So trying to think
mm,
about like what would be the visual representation of sort of like other values that could exist. But
yeah,
that's only a half solution.
yeah, definitely.
Um,
Yeah, maybe just coming in on that. I really, it just made me think of that. I mean, I think the function of the visual is, I guess, like, because it opens up our ability to imagine things when we can visualize them. But I guess that ties to the question that I had, which is that you touched upon it at the end. But I think for me, one of the biggest challenges has been to, I guess, to the fact that students come into the business school with that neoliberal subjectivity for pretty kind of rational and obvious reasons, which is often that they themselves have indebted themselves massively because of this privatization and growth model that universities have, and it's hard to get them out of that, because they, to survive, they also have embodied the very things that we are trying to get out of, in a way. And I think, yeah, I guess I'd just be interested to know more, like, I mean, I don't know, I guess that's like the tension I've identified. I mean, and the interesting question is, like, these subjectivities are not fixed, and they're in flux, and there's moments. But yeah, I don't know, maybe you could speak more about that.
I feel exactly the same way, and the challenge as well is also when you start to unpick this from a student perspective, in many ways, the path that it leads you to is a very different work path. And so that is incredibly challenging, because you are effectively pulling the rug out from underneath them. And you're also then questioning, in many ways, what is the purpose of a business school. But in saying that, though, there are a lot of business school scholars who are, I don't know if you've seen Andy Hoffman in University of Michigan, who's written a book called The Noble Purpose of the Market, Business Schools and the Noble Purpose of the Market. There's also, a couple of pretty senior business school profs that are coming around, or maybe they're toward the end of their career, but they've realized, oh, actually, we really do need to be doing something. And so I guess, and I don't think I'm answering this question very well at all. I guess to start with, I don't know if you're the same, but we don't even educate on planetary boundaries. So that is like a very basic, very sort of non-controversial introduction that can be made, that we have made in our business school. That then creates a whole conversation which springs up around, and that just mere small opportunity to go, oh, actually, there's an entire body of work out there that's called degrowth. And, it just facilitates that and makes the opportunity for there to be, I guess, resistance valid. But I completely feel you, because the other thing that is very daunting about all of this is that and there are business schools who are trying to integrate degrowth, but it's through sufficiency or calling it something else. Because if you call it degrowth, then it's a missile word, and it's also a very big turnoff, because of a million reasons within a business school. So yeah, there's a bunch of why we shouldn't do this, but I guess why we should do it is because we need to provide an expansive education. So that should provide opportunities to learn about different ways of thinking.
If I could follow on that, one thing some of us have talked about recently, I think we've done a bit, is I think we've somewhat transitioned away from even calling our work critical. And the reason why is because of kind of like degrowth. It comes with a certain cultural baggage that at times is off-putting to people. That they go, students go, oh, no, we don't want to deal with that critical stuff. And instead, more to talk about, no, we're talking about, in a kind of Martin Parker style, when he's not talking about burning things down, he's talking about, no, we're talking about modes of organizing. There are multiple modes of organizing. Here are different types of organizing. There are cooperatives. There's a long history of human society which didn't have like capitalist markets. And here are some examples you could use. And so I guess if you're talking about sort of the sort of ways which students get put off by certain phrases, whether degrowth or critique, um, have you thought about what happens if you drop some of them, or are there other sort of, let's say, secondary consequences of abandoning some of those framings?
Mm. So I guess, the degrowth scholars would argue and have argued to death about the title and the name of degrowth, as you'd probably be aware. And this idea of the co-option that can occur when we try to socialize terms to make them more palatable for, whatever reason, the evidence is just so firmly on the side of it actually decreases the impact of what we're trying to achieve.
Mm.
So I kind of think that at this point in the game of where we are currently, there is some value in being uncomfortable and in creating discomfort in students. Now, whether they like that, appreciate that, I think that's, going to be, it's something that we need to be mindful of. But I certainly don't think, and I think I was having a conversation this morning with someone in architecture. And so architecture has degrowth concepts. Architecture has its own terminology for virtually what it means to replace materials, to limit new buildings, effectively degrowth in the building context. And so for them, they see the value in connecting to that terminology because that terminology resonates within their context. And that makes a huge amount of sense. So we can all be talking about the same thing, but we might not be calling it degrowth. And I totally get that as well. So I think what's important is to make the point to students that degrowth is intentionally a missile word. And it's intentionally meant to provoke a conversation. And the conversation is happening within degrowth scholarship itself around this at this very moment. And so, students can have that conversation about whether they themselves think it's a worthy term or whether they think, it's not palatable enough and therefore not going to be effective. But, we've seen CSR, ESG, all of them come, and now we're still no better off for it. So I sort of kind of come down on the idea of, radical is needed.
I mean, part of why I asked that is for my sins, I taught business ethics for 10 years. And every year I would try to sort of put off dealing with certain thinkers for a while, like, and just talk about ethical theories, talk about various things. And every year, the moment Milton Friedman appeared, the students like moths all went whoop and just kept repeating the only purpose of business is to make profit, the only purpose. And it was just like so frustrating. It was like, do we have to bring in Milton Friedman? Okay, we probably have to. You can't teach business without mentioning him. But once you did, it was like the entire conversation shifted.
Yeah. But I think, though, we should be talking about Milton Friedman. We should be having these conversations, but we also should be locating that within a historical context and critiquing that, So I see value in that. But I guess the other thing to point out is that the curriculum is so crowded as well. So, we've gone through this motion of putting in electives around sustainability and da da da. So we've got to get back, take a step back and get back to the sort of 4 or 5 core components of the business curriculum and how we can do them better, rather than just adding on like, you know, all these electives around sustainable finance and ESG and blah, blah, blah. So this is, I think, where the future is.
Svetlana?
Hi. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you very much, Carla. Really, really interesting. It made me think because a lot of my practice, and I do research in pedagogy, and on the same time involved in the past in accreditation and regulatory side of education. So I was thinking that, you know, in the UK particularly, the sector, higher education sector particularly, is heavily regulated and very, you know, and changing now to even a stronger performativity, and therefore the demands from QOA, which is the UK, you know, standards body, as well as accrediting bodies, global, you know, AACSB and EQUIS and others, for, you know, development of skills, employability, you know, critical thinking, etc., had led to business schools thinking of different innovative pedagogical approaches to fit that, you know, whether it is innovations around how we develop SDGs and, you know, how we, you know, encourage, you know, students to think and align with the SDGs, and how we align our research on all the 17 criteria, etc. And so there's a challenge, you're right, in terms of, in the mindset, as you mentioned, about, you know, economic growth, you know, prosperity, performativity, and you know, and the ability to be, you know, free and explore and develop that, not necessarily the growth mindset, but childlike mindset, as you mentioned, and have that, you know, plurality. So plurality. So I was wondering whether, you know, there's a space to look at, you know, regulation and, you know, universities being necessarily, you know, put in some sort of straight suit or a straight jacket and bounded by that, you know, educational performance, research performance, knowledge exchange, impact, performance indicators. That is tricky because innovations in pedagogy develop, you know, largely in business schools to fit those, you know, requirements, standards.
Yeah. Yes. I can completely understand what you mean. We are a triple accredited business school, so we have accreditation every other year pretty well. One of the things that is interesting about accreditation, though, is that the accreditation actually also provides space and opportunity for, as you say, the innovation in the sustainability space, because they have all hitched themselves very firmly as sustainability and particularly responsible management and responsible business practices. So that language is all in there existing. And so I guess when we, you know, we talk about the SDGs, we talk about, you know, we talk about the SDGs, but we talk about the SDGs and exactly what the UN has said of the SDGs in more recent times is that they're in peril, and that we are meeting less than 30% of the criteria for the current 17 SDGs. So yeah, we talk about the SDGs, but we're talking about the SDGs as they actually currently stand. So I think accreditation is a double-edged sword. It can be quite the space for then to say we're innovating, and that's why I think, you know, the entrepreneurship part of this cannot be underestimated either, because, you know, that is a very attractive thing for a business school to talk in terms of entrepreneurship. And what we're talking about essentially is quite entrepreneurial in the sense that you're asking people to think quite differently about how they establish a business, run a business, organize a business, etc.
Thank you. No, I think it's an interesting space to certainly think and critique, especially from the sector perspective, as to, you know, in the UK, we are probably will be in the next budget regulated in terms of the fees and the funding based on the performance of the universities and how we, you know, how well we do. And those who don't will not get, you know, will not get it. So in those circumstances, it's a hard, you know, it's a hard space. But yeah, I think there's certainly an opportunity to look away from, you know, constant expectation of growth, but also look at quality.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can't get away from the system at the moment in terms of, you know, working within a business school, working within a university, working within a university sector, working within a government, you know, like we're just this one part of this bigger machine of government and of political economy. So absolutely, I guess this is where the ideas around niches and cracks and trying to exploit those is just these tiny little green shoots. How do we like grab onto them? Not pull them out though, just water them a little. How are we going for time?
Thanks.
We probably need to maybe.
I will have to leave shortly to go teach, but are there any other thoughts or questions? I mean, I'm sure there are, but that was super interesting, and I think it tapped into a number of things that we're already thinking about and trying to make sense of.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you. And if there's any other questions or any collaborations or anything where we could chat more, I would love that. So I put my email address on the slides, and I can share the slides as well with Stephen if you need.
The actual article is it open access? I can't remember.
It is, yes, it is open access. Yeah.
Okay. So if anyone wants to read it, just Google the, you know, or use your search provider of preference, the title of the event, and you could find it easily.
Great.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carla. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks a lot. I appreciate
Have a good
it.
evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day. See you.